Okay, welcome everybody to another episode of the Data Engineering Show. Welcome. With me today, Gunnar Tongring from Klarna in Sweden. Hi, Gunnar. How are you?
Hi, I'm good. How are you?
I'm very good. Thanks for joining us. So, for all you out there who don't know Klarna is a super interesting company. Klarna is in fintech from Sweden. It's actually one of the most valuable privately held fintech companies in the world. And last year, the last round of investment came from SoftBank, valued the company at $45 billion. Unbelievable. Klarna has been around since more or less, I think, 2005, has shown an amazing journey. So an idea that started around just making payments online smoother, and a team that kept evolving and pushing throughout the years. They're rather famous in recent years for the kind of, I don't know if you've seen this, but shop now, pay later kind of experience. And throughout the years, Klarna has also evolved into being licensed as an actual bank, having its own credit card, which is relatively recent, with already more than 1 million consumers using it, I think. So really exciting and interesting fintech company. Gunnar, anything I missed? You've been there for 6 years. Gunnar is a lead data engineer, architect, and more. So maybe tell us a little bit about Klarna from sort of somebody who's been there in the last 6 years, and then we'll dive into what you do there and beyond.
It's actually an incredibly good description, so thank you for that. But just my personal perspective, more from the data angle, is actually that I remember that I walked into a building and I thought it was kind of a growing startup, and it turned out to be a slightly larger company than I thought. But the scale we're at today is something very different, and that's incredibly noticeable on data side. I remember when I joined, there was this BI team, which consisted of a handful of people and basically handling all the different data requests across the company. The scale we're at now means that we have an entire, what we call, domain of around 60 people doing like the similar tasks we're just 5 people doing. So it's a completely different ballgame, of course, with that type of volumes. And it's been a lot of growth and pivoting into like new areas all the time. So it's always good fun.
Amazing. And so how did that tell us about your roles throughout the years?
Yeah, I actually started with report BI work, like traditional working in Cognos at the time, and generating the majority was actually like merchant reporting, but basically anything people would want to have covered. Like I want to know this, I want to know that, and that was not exactly what I wanted to do. So I was working a couple of years on our Hadoop infrastructure with basically building fairly large scale data flows at the time in various forms, a lot of like Hive SQL, and us building frameworks surrounding it. We built a tool called Hive Runner as an example to do unit testing of data, which is kind of cool. And then we moved to the cloud. So that was then you know what you're doing for a couple of days.
So Cognos is not around anymore.
No, it's not. But but the journey of like, hey, let's move everything to the cloud. I think that's when I understood what Klarna was all about, actually, because we were. It wasn't some kind of let's do this. It will take the time it takes. It's more like, hey, let's do this like now, fast, and like get it all done. And we did that, and we kind of pulled it off within reasonable timelines. So that was nice. But we shifted our entire infrastructure to cloud-based only, which obviously data is one of the parts where that becomes tricky, because you need to migrate a lot of. You have to migrate the data in itself, but you also need to migrate your tooling. We did not go for like Hadoop on cloud type of setup, so we shifted quite a lot.
So today, Klarna is cloud only when it comes to the data stack.
Yes.
So when was the final switch off for an on-prem? We've been talking to companies throughout the years. The length of time it takes to complete it is between years to indefinitely. So, just reaching the state where it's completely off is an achievement in its own sometime. So how long ago was that?
I don't remember 100%, but I think it was probably like 3 years ago or something like that. But the nice thing was actually that we were quite happy with our work because we were out. We were not the last ones out, so that meant that someone else was running something on some service somewhere. And but like when we actually managed to pull the plug, there was obviously like an announcement video where someone was going to the computer hall and like unplugging the final computer that we had in Stockholm, and then we were into a new era, really.
That's fine. That's fun. That's fun. So many people who won't be able to ever experience that, people nowadays born in the cloud. So, you deserve like a medal for being there when on-prem was unplugged for Klarna.
We're a fairly modern company, but I still think like kids these days don't understand like why would you have like this metal thing under your desk? Like, oh, it's to keep your like the computer, and the computer was actually the server, which was actually giving people what they needed. It's a different area, but it's been kind of a fast transition in the industry, I think, as well. Like the debate of like cloud or not is fairly dead to me.
The debate is definitely over, I think, even though there's a lot of on-prem activity still around, more than we typically think. Every time there's a survey comes out and it turns out, there's so much workload still happening on-prem. Some portions of the industry are just much slower to move than we sort of on the more advanced side of sort of data and tech tend to realize. Because we live in this modern data stack world, and sometimes we forget that we're just a segment, that there's so much workload out there on-prem. But yeah, it's all coming to the cloud for sure. Tell me, so Klarna is over 6,000 people big worldwide, according to what I see on LinkedIn, more or less. But how many people are spread across the different data teams? So how many people deal with data, and how are the variety of teams structured at Klarna? If you could walk us through that.
Yeah, so I think there are two different stories to tell. Like one would be like we work in the data platform and core models domain, where I work as a domain architect. But our structure internally is basically that we have roughly half of our domain of around 60 people is infrastructure people building the platform. So providing tooling for other people to do data processing, in essence, building frameworks and making sure the databases are running, making sure that we have the correct setups of access to data on blob storage, and building a data catalog as we have as well. And the other half is doing what we call core models, basically being end-to-end BI teams. So they work with more like central data that would be not possible to own within a specific domain of the company. But that's the next step. Like a lot of our data teams are actually either something that is working like in the finance department with data, and it might even be like a team that is explicitly working only with data. And we have, teams doing big data processing in various spaces, everything from risk decisioning to fraud detection to anomaly detection with like problems that can occur with our merchants. So I see more and more of these like, hey, we need to spin up a data team for something somewhere in the organization, and less of like, hey, can you please do this centrally at the company because we need this to be done from you. And that's very much in line with how we are trying to build the company. But we want to have like the domain knowledge close to what is actually going on. And I think for data, that's in particular extremely important, because I see a lot of cases where we have this, someone is being asked to do something, they don't really know why. And they are deemed to be like the data people who know exactly how to handle data. But how to handle data will be very much a product of what the data actually, like, why is this data generated this way? Like, what does this field mean? All of these things are impossible to know if you're working in some kind of decoupled function centrally at the company. You might be extremely good at sparse indexing or something really cool for performance tuning, but it doesn't really help if you don't know what you're doing.
So you guys are looking into sort of a data mesh kind of implementation?
Yeah, I would say so. We've looked a bit at data mesh, but the thing for us with data mesh is actually it wasn't something that came like from the sky that like, hey, let's do data mesh. It was more we looked at what we were doing, and then we looked at data mesh, and we realized that this is very close to what we're actually doing. And we can learn some things, we can tie some things into the terminology. But I mean, for me, the key takeaway with data mesh is really the ownership aspect. Like I want to have strong ownership.
So you're saying, it's not about us picking up a data mesh, guide and implementing it by the book, if the book even exists. The data mesh in itself, at the end of the day, talks to something that in the industry has always gone back and forth. So centralization versus decentralization, in essence. And you're saying you're leaning now towards decentralization and domain ownership much more at this stage where Klarna is, makes more sense for you guys, right?
Yeah, but I think we've always been a bit towards that angle, but I don't think we've had the vocabulary for it. But what you're saying is like there is a data mesh book now, and I haven't read all of it. I will read it at some point, and I think it's good inspiration. But I also think it's kind of unclear exactly how you would implement it, and I see a lot of flame wars of like, is this actual data mesh or not? And then I just realized that that's not what I want to discuss. I want to discuss like what is the thing that drives our company forward in a good way. And I think ownership and like how to actually set the boundaries, those type of discussions are needed. But I think data mesh in itself doesn't really give the answers. It just gives you a framework of how to talk about it in a sense.
I completely agree. It's a framework, and it looks different in every company because it depends on people as well and processes and on the details of the organization. It's like to some extent, I feel like being agile. How do you become agile? There was this decade where everybody was talking about becoming agile in software. There's no one way of becoming agile. There's many ways to implement it. Changes from company to company. But absolutely makes sense. But what about data engineering though? So, there's BI, there's data engineering. How are they split? And isn't data engineering more centralized compared to the BI teams? Or is that also spread across the different domains?
Yeah, so I think there's two answers. Like one thing is like terminology matters. And I think we've been discussing if we should release the title like analytics engineer or similar, because the people we have who are working with what a lot of people would call BI would potentially be labeled as data engineers, and that could be like a wide scale from you have everything from someone working with building automation of pipelines and someone actually like implementing the use cases. So I think there's a space there where titles could make a difference. But I also think the type of data warehousing work or whatever you would label it that we're doing might also be different in the sense that you kind of fast fall into the scale of things. So you don't really have, maybe you're writing SQL all day, but you're still like, if you don't know how to perform this in SQL, then you will have problems. Like I think it's a title question in that sense, but I agree. Like the things we're doing that I would label as data engineering and not analytical engineering are more centralized. And if I take the clear example of like building and implementing and adopting frameworks for making sure that we can build analytical pipelines, that's something that we consider to be something we should centralize and offer as like standardized component. If you talk about data mesh again, like I think of this as building like the sidecars that you need to run your analytics products in the company. And for us, it makes sense to centralize. It makes sense to standardize because you get so much things out of the box. And the way we work is really, if you want to build your own thing, like go ahead. But if you want to integrate with the 10 different tools we have available, if you want to be compliant, then it's probably a whole lot easier if you're using the framework that we already have at hand. But it's a give and take. Like if you have a super specific use case, you can always build what you need for that, basically.
So so you're saying though, everything above data pipelines, to some extent, you prefer and analytics engineer, meaning somebody that can do full stack data, essentially, sort of a mix of data engineering and analytics. And I think in general, that's a trend we see in the market. Like the term analytics engineering is sort of half picked up, but people are starting to like it. But I actually look at it more of I like to call it full stack data developer or something like that. It's a kind of a combination of meshing BI and data engineering together, because you can't do much today if you're not able to go further down the stack and roll up your sleeves and do some kind of data engineering to some extent. And I think more and more data professionals are finding that out, and that mixture of bridging the two is definitely picking up. Interesting to hear that you are going about that at the Klarna. But do you guys already use the title analytics engineer or not really yet?
No. We're discussing it. But I mean, to comment on like the full stack, I think of it very much as like data being a field. Actually, it's not unique to data, but I think in general, I think it's more and more important nowadays to be a bit T-shaped in actually having one technology or something that you're good at, and then having something else to combine it with. And that might be that you have like, maybe you're great at building analytical pipelines and you're good at the domain knowledge of finance or something. Or it might be that you have like DevOps capabilities and can help with other things. And I think I agree that like a wider stack is a strength that you need to showcase. I think it's incredibly hard for everyone to have enough to fill up like the entire scale. So from that perspective, I'm sometimes thinking like, hey, it doesn't matter what title you have, because I will still have to like probe and understand what you're actually doing. I think that's particularly, I realized this being an architect for a while, because when you talk to other architects, it's just such a scale of everything from like, I don't know any details to I know all the details to like I draw houses, like literally, of course. But I had that confusion with some neighbor that they thought I was drawing houses and could like help them. But I just asked, do you have a database? Then maybe I can help. But I do think that like actually having this, like, what are my core things within the trait? Like what would be my 2-3 things to pick up on, like some kind of strengths. That's how I view profiles in general, and I think I'm more inclined to want to hire someone who's really good at like 2 different things, as opposed to someone who's more like jack of all trades type of person. So yeah, that's where I might oppose full stack, but I do hear what you're saying.
Got it. So tell me, walk us through the current data stack. So now everything is in the cloud. How does the data stack at Klarna look like?
So we have what we call a data lakehouse, and we thought we branded the term and printed hats and things, but then it turned out that I think someone else used the same term before us, but we were happily unaware and just thought we had invented something new. But in essence, we're running an AWS analytics stack. So we're quite heavy users of.
By the way, you guys should make some noise about it. Go online and shout from the roofs. Hey, we coined the term data lakehouse.
Yeah. I've told Databricks, but then I googled it and I actually found some reference where I think they were using the term before us. But
never mind the facts. Let's rewrite history.
Yeah. But I mean, we did invent it, like in that sense. We did coin the term, but it's not something super complicated in the sense that if you think of it from more of an API perspective, it's a platform where you can publish data and as a producer, and then you can consume it as a consumer, and you don't really have to necessarily worry about the exact location of the data or exactly how things are working within this box. But it's a combination of basically S3 and Redshift and EMR clusters and Spark jobs running. And we manage that centrally with the configuration possibilities for the users, and are iterating on it every day, of course.
So in your transition to the cloud, Redshift was selected as sort of the enterprise data warehouse, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, and that was like, if you look at where we were coming from a fairly interesting scenario where we had a mix of like Postgres and Hadoop, and the actual data warehouse was implemented in Microsoft SQL. And when I say Postgres, that wasn't just one machine somewhere. It wasn't like 10 machines being having the same structure either. It was just a wild mix of a lot of different databases all over the place. But so we went for Redshift as being like the main data warehouse engine with capabilities of also processing like less refined data. So that's where like the lakehouse term really refers to being able to access through one logical environment where you don't have to go to a different place because you need data from a different domain. You can go to the lakehouse. You have the lake, you have the house, and like both order and disorder in the same place.
Was also like Athena used around it?
We are not using Athena heavily. It's one of the things we're actually looking at how to leverage more potentially, but it's expanding in usage, I would say. But we used it extensively for like when implementing it was like the go-to tool, because it's extremely powerful to use it for interactive results on fairly large data volumes, actually. And I was always surprised when using Athena that I would expect things to be slower than they were, being used to running Hive. But a lot of things were actually quite snappy. But then you run into some limitations, of course, of the tool. Like it doesn't. It's kind of built to be a happy path tool, and Hive is very much the opposite, where you focused on resilience and jobs just running until they actually finish. Athena is more just, whoops, it didn't work. I'm not going to tell you, but you don't get any results. So it's a different experience, but it worked really well for like when we were implementing things and needed to like quickly look at the data and draw some conclusions. It's just been very helpful. Also very good for like doing sanity checks on, like, if you have the data gap for whatever reason, you can fairly easily use it to just spot that.
What else is in use in the stack outside of Redshift?
So we use Airflow for orchestration, and we've built our own framework surrounding it. So we have a team that is focusing on building frameworks. So instead of actually exposing Airflow to our end users, we're leveraging our own CI/CD setup for it. So you're kind of forced to come into our setup where we guarantee that you have version control for the transformations, and you have some support outside of what you can get from Airflow. And we don't get the risk of people messing up too much, because you have to go through our Jenkins to get things running, basically. One other thing that I would like to mention, and that I didn't, is our data catalog as well, which is a thing we built recently based on Data Hub from LinkedIn. So this is one of the things we realized was a big gap when we rolled out our first iteration, that we don't have we didn't have a good way to just give users a way to discover all the data in a sensible manner. So we decided to adopt a solution that would be flexible enough for our needs. So we rely on being able to ingest metadata from other services by pushing the data to Data Hub. So that was a conscious decision to go for like a flexible open source project that seems to have some traction.
Got it. What data volumes are you guys dealing with?
Well, it's petabytes at least. So the thing is, it kind of varies depending on the domain. And we have a lot of our growth of data is quite big in a lot of the things that have gone live later. So it's always, like when you talk about how much data we have and how much it's growing, we do have hockey stick curves for a lot of it, and that's a challenge, of course. But we always have to my experience has been that when you go live with something new, you tend to be at the state where you're producing a bit more data than you need because you're going for a fairly naive setup. So ironically, even though the volumes are growing, you tend to be able to manage it more over time, and it becomes more predictable because you can determine what is useful or not. But the overall influx, I don't have the number.
How much of all the data ends up in Redshift? Like all of it, or is it, do you do like a year, 2 years?
No, not all of it. So it's we obviously want to keep it sensible, but this is always a friction point because it's tricky to work with a situation where you would need to send people to different places depending on what data we need. So I would say we have more than we would wish for is what I would say.
And what do you guys do for ETL or ELT batch processing? When Spark or other things?
Yeah, we run Spark, so we run a combination of and some Hive actually as well. But we run a combination of Glue and EMR, so that gives us the main use case for us with using AWS Glue is really that we get access to runtime of serverless Spark, and that's quite convenient because that means we can. We have an API that is well known. If we would want to run things on a different compute, that would actually be potentially possible. So that's SQL is the big thing in terms of standard languages, but Spark is actually gaining some traction, and it's interesting to see that. I would predict that if Spark is being replaced with something, I would expect them to try to keep compatibility with the API, basically, to be able to help people to migrate if possible, because it's becoming kind of a standard for running PySpark for the heavy lifting.
Tell us about your day-to-day. So what are you working on now? How does your job look like?
Yeah, so my main focus is actually iterating on our architecture. So basically, more technical, like reworking the topology of how we have our sizing of different components in the data stack is my main thing. Obviously, I'm doing various other things, but that's like the big thing on my table, I would say.
So where do you want to see, imagine like 2 years from now, where do you want to see Klarna in terms of data capabilities?
I would want to have a zero, like my dream would be to have like zero concurrency concerns, basically. So I would want to have a situation where everyone who just wants to do some data processing would be able to do it and just pay for what they need and not have to worry at all about where the data is. I think that's a pain point that even though we have a fairly consistent environment, there's still a situation where you might be sent to a specific place because of having specific data needs. I would want to break that down entirely and just let people choose the capacity they want and ideally the tool they want. But I think that's a bit utopian. I don't think it's you won't be able to offer everything, but at least do you want SQL or Spark, that type of decisions, and have frameworks that just support you to do the work you need. That's what I would.
How is so with the data organization that's so big, how do you guys even go about making these decisions? Making decisions that would affect the long run. Can you tell us a little bit about sort of the culture of decision making around data at Klarna?
Yeah, I mean, historically, it's been a bit unclear, but with what we're doing now is basically going full blown with RFCs and ADR processes for everything. So to make sure that people have an opportunity to raise their voices about the different decisions, but typically these things also take some time. So it is a process of hey, we're doing this, so maybe I would propose an ADR for it, and then I would get some pushback, and then we would move forward with it. But but yeah, it's becoming more and more formalized, and I think that's like some people love that, some people hate that, but it becomes a necessity when you're growing. That yeah, you just realize other people have solved this problem of having growth, and it is like some kind of administration that is needed. You can no longer like just tell people as the coffee machine, like, hey, we're going to make a change. And then it's like, oh, but like I'm in the Toronto office, like, oh, no, like I didn't hear what you said at the coffee machine. So like clearly there's an increased need for formalities. Yeah.
The challenges of how you need to adapt the way you work for scale. We feel it also at Firebolt, where we've grown tremendously, and we spread worldwide, and it's you need to invest more time in writing things properly, sharing them properly, encouraging people to chime in.
But how big are you at the moment? Just
it's like a drop in the sea compared to you guys, 200, but doubled within a year, so it feels huge for us.
Yeah, but you need to be prepared for the growth as well.
Yeah, sure. So we're growing fast.
Start thinking.
So looking at that journey now, imagine you would do everything from scratch. So what have you learned in terms of if our listeners are going through the same journey, modernizing their Hadoop and leftovers from on-prem, and now sort of are all in AWS? What would you have done differently now that would have saved you some time or headache that you know today?
Yeah, I think it's like boring standard things, but I think I would not necessarily focus more on testing and documentation, but on strictness on the get-go. I think this is something that like it always bites you in the tail when you end up taking decisions that, like, hey, we can do this a bit faster if we cut a bit down on the strictness that we want to have. And I think going forward with more strictness of like, this is how we expect data to be produced, and like this is exactly how things should work, as opposed to like, let's try to solve this local problem for now, and later we will implement some kind of strictness. That's a very tough transition to make. So I think that's what I would change. So try to be stricter from the start, and maybe like the way you would handle the exceptions, because you will always have someone like breathing down your neck and force you to take some shortcuts. I would probably have had some kind of exception process and just gather like the poor technical decisions that were made with a clear ambition to move faster. Because I think that would be helpful, not to actually solve those cases, but to get like an overview of like what we need to learn for the good future cases. So that would be what I would change, I think.
So for Klarna, you're doing a lot with architecture today. When was the point in time where architects for the data or became a full-time job, became something people decided to, we need architects, not people to do this sort of as a side job?
That's a good question. I think it was probably must have been like 4 years ago or something. And at that time, we actually had, at the time, it was a product manager who stepped into the first architecture role. And I think that's, I thought it was a bit weird then and there, because again, like titles and how do you think about it? But now it makes a lot of sense to me. I think like I come from a data development background entirely. For me, I realized the type of things I need to adapt and pick up. It's a lot of actual product management, because you are actually building a product, and you need to think of it that way. And like we've had looking at architecture, like the way we work. Like I act as the architect of the domain and the actual technological platform. But then looking at like how we drive architecture on like data modeling, that's more of like team responsibility in a way as well. And I think that's also an area where it's a bit tricky to like find the exact sweet spot for how to do that. Like how much you should, again, like centralization versus federation. Like how do you get everyone to build data models that are consistent with each other without having someone centrally just telling them exactly what to do. And I think that's one of the things that is a bit of a challenge. I don't think there's any standard solution for doing it, but there's surely a need for having syncs on how to do that type of architecture. And we have some things that come centrally in terms of how you should name your fields, or the different country codes is the trivial, funny example, but it's easy to standardize exactly how you do it. But then it's just a never-ending list of these type of things.
Interesting, the product person moving into the data role, like you said, more and more thinking about data as product, which is, by the way, another link back sort of to the data mesh story, because in there, the concept of data as product is also heavily included in the story. But it's true. At the end of the day, I think more and more companies are doing that without noticing. Just as you guys notice, hey, we're doing something that feels like it's a data mesh. Many companies at the end of the day have realized, unless we treat the data as if it was a product and understand end users who are, the internal, it could be analysts or whoever, it will definitely make our life easier down the road. And it just has picked up like crazy, which is true. What are the top use cases? What are the top sort of data use cases, workloads that run today that the company sort of is very reliant on and are interesting?
So I think that's a hard one to answer, in the sense that obviously there are processes that are more important and central, and they might have a smaller scale of what we're doing, but be extremely valuable. But then you also have the actual scenario where almost all the different product development teams are doing A/B testing of their features, and we need follow up and train models for how we're doing our decisions. And I think as a company, every company is doing bookkeeping and financial reporting. I think as a company we have a more skewed towards both the product development and the underwriting aspects. I think that those are what sets us apart a bit, and it's also partly why we have probably a different load profile from a lot of other companies. I would predict that other banks are not doing the same type of large data processing in the same sense, because if I look at their web pages, it doesn't quite look like they're doing A/B testing of every feature. It looks more like someone thought something very sensible through, and then they built it, and it's okay. But for us, it's more to the core of if we release this feature in our app, what will the implication be? And those type of things are really, I think that's the type of data use cases. We are an analyst in a team that is working with a specific module would want to know, does this work better than this layout if we do this little tweak in this thing? Will more people realize that they need to look at this thing, and do we get less people dropping off?
So it's very clear that Klarna in essence is very modern when it comes to everything with data. Maybe not what we're used to seeing in the traditional finance world, but definitely representative of sort of the new age, the modern fintech companies, where everything has to be data driven and data is entrenched in across the departments in their decisions and how they work.
I think that there's never a scenario where we take decisions and it's okay to not have any form of data. So we really need to back up the company in a lot of these things to make sure that people are not having to do gut-based calls.
So I wonder, for our listeners, try to look up Klarna. Have a sort of very cool commercial that was viral with the fish sort of moving down, how do you call it? This a slide, a kid slide, and then smoothly sort of moving across the floor, and then the message is just smooth pavements or something like that. So I wonder how how many fish were part of the A/B test. Types of fish, maybe a tuna and a salmon, and there was an A/B test, and the right fish was selected for the commercial.
Unfortunately, I was not part of that, but yeah, like just I mean, A/B testing is such a central thing when like the core of what you're doing is just removing friction, and yeah, the fish had no friction. I think that was probably part of the message there.
Very creative piece of commercial. Okay, Gunnar, this has been super interesting. Thank you so much for sharing those stories with us. I had a good time.
Thank you.
And I hope you had a good time as well. So we've launched just a few months ago. We're growing quite nicely, right? Yes. How many views do we have?
Very happy.
I think we've got like we're in the thousands, right?
Happy.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, not bad. But we want more. If you like this, help us spread the love.
Yes.
If you don't like Eldad, spread,
vote for replacing me for someone else. That's fine.
And, we promise to try our best to keep bringing
You're amazing, boss.
The data people from the most interesting data companies. So subscribe, make our mama proud, help us out.
Love you, mom.